Thanks for your time today. I can see quite a few happy users of Alares already in the room, so thank you all for that. A lot of you, as Wayne said, will already be familiar with what we do. So I'm just going to do a very quick refresher for those who have not seen this. But in a nutshell, what Alares does is we fill a gap in credit bureau information relating to court actions. So contrary to common belief or perception, most court actions are actually not captured in credit bureau reports or their alerts. So most are not captured. What we do is we fill that gap, capture everything that they don't, to give you a more complete picture around your potential credit risk. And what we know through the process is many debtors that default on payments and ultimately go into insolvency have prior court actions leading up to that. That can be a really useful indicator. So when you're first assessing a credit application or while they're a customer of yours, to be aware of these things as they come along. We augment your current process, so we don't replace anything that you do now. We just augment what you currently do with more data and more insight to help in your decision-making process. So a quick comparison here again. A lot of you will have seen this. This particular company is U-Foods. If you look at the credit report there on the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see it shows no court actions. Very commonly, credit managers will look at that and will rightfully sort of think that they're not involved in court actions. In reality, they have been involved in several court actions. And some of these you can see are quite serious. So they're in the Supreme Court and in the Federal Court. They're setting aside a stat demand. In this case here, they were sued here in the Supreme Court for declaratory relief, and they've also got fair work issues. So again, if you're relying solely on the right-hand side of the screen, it's very simple. You could very easily form a view about this company. If you include our information as well, it gives you a much more complete picture about where your risk may sit. Very similarly here, so here's an example where Equifax did actually pick up, in this case it was a default judgment filed about 5 years prior to this report. It's $2,000 and change, so it's a pretty small matter. What they don't pick up though is damages claim, misleading and deceptive conduct, and then another commercial division claim. This court action ultimately led to these guys going into insolvency shortly thereafter. So again, it's sort of easy looking at the right-hand side of the screen to get a warm and fuzzy potentially, whereas if you throw our data into the mix as well, you might form a very different view about how you want to deal with these guys. So what does it mean for credit managers? For new credit applications, obviously more data, more insights, improve your due diligence, improve your, basically better inform your decision-making process in terms of whether you want to give them credit or not, how much credit and on what terms. For your existing customers, ongoing monitoring and alerts, so basically early warning signs for potential problems. So, you know, everything may be fine today, but, you know, as we know in sort of the COVID world in particular, a lot of uncertainty and things can change quite quickly. So while things may be great today, what about next week, next month, 6 months down the track? What we do is give you the early warning sign where you can proactively start to manage your risk. A couple of quick case studies and then we'll get into the meat of it. This here is a company called Van Sand Construction, which may be known to a few of you. What you can see here is that these guys have been involved in a laundry list of court actions. If you look at their credit file, it doesn't show any of these. And you can see, just looking on the right there, that some pretty big players have had a go at these guys. Now, what does it mean for you if Vancine were to knock on your door this afternoon and say, "Hey, I'd like to apply for credit with you"? Pulling their credit report's not going to tell you this. So, yeah, the risk is that you could very likely end up as being sort of the next name on this list in having to pursue legal action against them if they don't pay you. And if they're an existing customer of yours already, then, you know, obviously all along here there's sort of 11 different alerts that you would have got along the way to forewarn you of potential trouble. That's an example for a company. This is an example here for a sole trader or a director. Often it's important to know where your risk lies in relation to both. What we commonly see is, especially for small businesses, people are happy to sort of torch a company, but they're not so happy at torching their own finances. So very commonly what we see now is that it's not just the company getting sued, but also the shareholders, the directors of those companies are personally getting attached to claims as well. And here's a case here. So this chap, he's had sort of every man and their dogs had a go at him, including some very big players there as well. And again, the idea is if he came and knocked on your door today looking for credit, this gives you a much more complete picture as to where your risk might lie if you decide to extend credit. Okay, any questions, by the way, up to this point, or otherwise I will march on. Yes?
How do you get the data?
Direct from the courts.
How do you get that when it's not all the courts are online?
I'm happy to have a chat to you.
It's just, like you said, not all court records
Yep.
are available.
Look, it's very difficult to get, which is why it's sort of not ubiquitously available from all over the place. But it is. We spent a number of years pulling it together. It is difficult, but happy to have a chat after. So, question we commonly get is, I've run a report. It shows that there's court actions, but what does it all mean? Now, the answer to that question, like many things, is it all depends. So it obviously depends on what it is, where it is, how old it is, etc., etc. So what we can sort of say definitively is there are certain types of court actions that are clearly very bad. So if a customer is subject to a winding up application, if they've got a Supreme Court money owing claim or something of that nature, that's obviously very bad. But what about all of the other types of court actions? So what if they've got a fair work claim? What if they've got workplace injury claims? What if it's something generic like a directions hearing where it could be any number of different things? What does that mean ultimately in terms of credit? And in those cases, there's a lot of considerations. So there's obviously, and look, what we always say is it's sort of a rare day when a customer is in court and you sort of jump up and down and celebrate. Pretty much, invariably, if somebody's in court, it's some variant of bad. Sometimes it's a little bit bad, sometimes it's a lot bad, but it's generally not a good thing. When somebody has to rock up and spend all the time and money and distraction of going to court. Then the question is, well, what if they're a plaintiff first? What if they're a defendant? Is everything rosy because they're a plaintiff? You've obviously got the court hierarchy, so starting with the CATs, the Civil and Administrative Tribunals, all the way up to the Supreme and Federal Courts. Then there's a question of, they've got one court action versus they've got many. What does that mean? Obviously, the type of court action is very critical, and also the age. So, if something happened 10 years ago, does that still matter? Versus if something happened last week, where does that all sit? So, what we have done, as Wayne said in his intro, is that we've come up with our own metric that we have coined the Insolvency Risk Factor. And what that does is basically it's a statistical measure that provides an indication of the severity and the impact of a set of court actions. Where it comes from is we have something over 5 million records in our database, about 100,000 odd corporate insolvencies within that. We've run a very substantial analytics program around all that to identify what types of court actions and what number of court actions are the most indicative of a future insolvency. And what the IRF literally means is it's a risk multiplier. So basically, if a company has an IRF of 10, what it means is statistically that set of court actions that they're involved in makes them 10 times more likely to become insolvent in the next 12 months than a company that doesn't have any court actions. So it just makes a really simple visual way to look at, for example, this and say, okay, there's a whole bunch of stuff here. How bad is it all? So the IRF pulls all of that information together and gives you, similar to a credit score, gives you sort of a number and a visual indicator to say, look, statistically, this is a little bit bad, sort of medium bad, or really bad. And just some statistics here at the bottom. So at a very high level, what we found is across the board, companies that are involved in any type of court matter of any description are overall 3 times more likely to go insolvent than companies that are not involved in any court actions. Plaintiffs to matters are still more likely to go insolvent, although being a defendant is basically twice as bad. So if your customer's a plaintiff, that doesn't mean you can necessarily jump for joy, but it is slightly better than them being a defendant in the matter. And interestingly, and this is really quite eye-opening for us, was what we found is companies that are involved in between 3 and 8 different court actions, they become 30 times more likely to go insolvent. So the number of court actions becomes a very, very strong indicator and a very strong multiplier. Couple of things here worth noting is the insolvency risk factor can increase for a number of reasons. One is if a company is involved in a very serious matter, that can increase their risk, but also if they just start getting involved in a large number of matters. So each of them on their own might be sort of small things, but in combination and in totality, that can be that can basically represent a very high risk. And over time, the risk decreases. So what we found is that 3 years tends to be the key window of relevancy. Once things are much older than 3 years, they tend to no longer be very indicative anymore. So, company may have an issue today. Over time, if they sort of trade out of that and if they get through that, then we find that their risk will drop again unless something new comes along. And for all BICB members, the IRF is now available. If you would like it enabled in your account, please just drop us an email either to our admin line or you can flick a note to me personally as well. We'll be happy to enable that for you. Any questions?
Any idea of the cost?
Yeah, we're passing this on to members at no of the searches, and you get the IRF at no extra charge. You can also, for people who are interested in monitoring their ledger or parts of their ledger, we can also filter based on the IRF score. So you're not getting through sort of every speeding ticket, but you can nominate, you know, I only want to see things that are above an IRF of say 30, and then that way you'll only get alerted if, you know, if it's quite high up on the on our dial. Any other questions?
I might just add a comment. I remember when you first introduced this to me, you came into our office and you had your laptop with you and you showed me you know, a couple of companies that you'd done a risk assessment or risk score on, and I thought, well, I wonder what it looks like in our database. I wonder what it looks like in our database. And so I jumped on to have a look at our database, and so you'd seen them, you know, fairly high risk with the criteria that you use. And when we dived into a couple that we looked at on our database would have had them at a similar level of risk. So I thought, well, that's a pretty powerful indicator that, you know, that one thing that you're looking at is court actions. But if you mix that with the other data that's available through our system, it really does tell a picture. And quite often, it will duplicate the assessment that you've made, would make a similar assessment based on what we would be looking at in our database. And that's the members that were here this morning. We talked about how we are working on the next round of our software development, which includes all these predictive tools. So we're going to be building a score on each of our data files in our system, and that will then present in a report that we're making available on the system. And we might be doing something in conjunction with Alares as well to actually enhance this with them, which there'll be a cost for, but you will get that information on our database anyway. But what we're saying is we're value adding what they're doing, making it even more valuable at no extra charge, really.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Wayne. Some users use us, for instance, as sort of the first thing that they do, where if they see a report like this, they'll say, look, George, you know, sorry, but happy to supply you, but it's going to be cash up front. And in terms of the credit process, they won't even take it any further. Some will use us towards the end of the process, where they go, look, this George guy is sort of saying all the right things, but something's just not sort of smelling quite right. Where they'll then run our report to do a bit of a cross-check and go, right, I've sort of put my finger on why I wasn't feeling too good about this guy. But it really is, you know, no one tool tells you everything. It really is about putting the picture together with all the information that you have available to be able to inform yourself to make the best decision you possibly can, and both at the outset and then also obviously you know, ongoing with, you know, most of your clients you'll be trading with sort of continuously, so you'll want to just make sure that you're always being proactively managing the risk rather than reacting to it.
Absolutely. And I couldn't stress or promote enough the ability of Alares to actually monitor your customers. So a lot of our members are actually monitoring either their entire customer base or, you know, their top 20 or their top 20% or whatever. and those members are then alerted automatically through our system when it picks up an adverse finding or a court action involving one of their customers. And so they'll get that is a red flag alert, and those things go out every day. And we see the when we do our background stuff, our management of all those sorts of all that data, where we actually run the admin system behind it all, we see a heck of a lot of court actions coming through, and we sit in an approval queue, and basically we just have a look, and we have the option to exclude some things, like for example a workplace accident, those sorts of things. We tend not to unless the members are actually asking to monitor those things. We've seen things like red light cameras. Somebody's gone through a red light camera in a company vehicle, and it comes up under that company. So whether you want to, whether you're interested in that or not, but sometimes we let those go through. So it's a pretty powerful tool.
Yeah, it's interesting. Some of the, intuitively you would expect certain court actions to be far better indicators, and that's certainly what the data shows. Interestingly, workplace injury didn't seem to have much of a indication at all, but fair work claims consistently were a very strong indicator. And it probably sort of makes sense where if you're not paying people or if you're mistreating your people, then it probably speaks to your organisation as a whole. But yeah, so fair work did rank quite high.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah.
All right. Any other questions?
All right.
All right. Thank you,
Patrick. We thank you for the time. We thank you for your product, actually.
No worries. Thank you, Wayne. Will this?